My name is Ronan MacDonald. I'm Vice President of the Celtic Club, and I am here in Melbourne Cemetery with Val Noone. Val, as everyone watching will know, is a historian and an expert on Irish contribution to Melbourne, Irish presence in Melbourne, the migration to Melbourne. And Val's legendary tours of Melbourne we're trying now to put onto film, to have a record. And today he's going to show myself and other members of the Celtic Club some of the Irish graves in Melbourne Cemetery and introduce us to stories of those who now occupy those graves. I was really startled to hear from Val just now that 30,000 Irish people estimated are now rest in Melbourne Cemetery.
Well, it's wonderful to be invited to speak about a topic that I love to study and pass on. So it's a good day for me, and we're very lucky that we haven't got rain at this stage. We might before we finish, but it looks like being okay. But thanks so much for setting this up.
Delighted, Val.
My own background is that I'm Melbourne born and bred, from people who came here 150 years ago from Ireland. And the Irish kept marrying Irish in my case, and my wife's case also. So we think in the days of globalisation, it's pretty good to be able to relate to people of all sorts of different cultures. But the best way to relate to people of other cultures is to understand your own culture and your own cultural heritage. And that's what took me and my family into this study. We started with family history. We've gone on to look at the history of Irish culture in Victoria. We've gone on to look at some of the places in the cemetery that related to the centenary, decade of centenaries in Ireland. So happy to be here and happy to make the most of the day.
As you look around the graveyard, there are so many Celtic crosses. You can see them as far as you know, from every angle. And I know that many of those Celtic crosses, and one of the reasons I'm looking forward to this tour, many of them were designed by Morgan Jagers, who is an ex-president of the Celtic Club, isn't that right?
Yeah, of course.
And buried here himself.
Yes.
And we're going to see some of his magnificent sculptures and designs.
Yes, I suppose he was up to date with what was happening in the Gaelic revival in Ireland, but they must have made a bit of effort to get information backwards and forwards. You know, ships took ages to come until the steamships come a bit quicker. The mail would come, but it's really interesting to think that 12,000 miles or 20,000 kilometres away from there, they were doing these things to keep the heritage alive and pass it on. Yeah. And here it is memorialised in hard physical objects. Most of the people Irish who came to Victoria in the 1800s don't have stones over their graves. The ones that have stones, memorial stones, are ones whose children did well enough to put them up. Most of the people who came here came as farm labourers and domestic servants, and they would have had a wooden cross on their grave. You can track it down. Yeah. The ones you're going to see today, they're mainly built from the 1860s onwards, when they're starting to get a few bob, and especially from the 1880s and 1890s onwards, and into the 1900s, of course.
Amazing. I always feel that visiting a graveyard, spending time in a graveyard, looking at the inscriptions on the tombstones connects you to the lives of others, the lives of those who are long dead. I think especially in a graveyard in the middle of a city, there's such a haven of peace. I've often walked through this graveyard on my way to the University of Melbourne where I work and seen the number of Irish names. So I'm really looking forward to getting an insight into the history more. Look, it's the clouds are holding off, but maybe we should get on with it.
Listen, what about a bit of work? Can we get a student to come and do a bit of a study of all it more scientifically than I've done?
I think we could. I don't see why we couldn't. In fact, a colleague of mine has got a project on cemeteries. He's an anthropologist. Yeah. But we could certainly. I mean, we're right beside the university.
Yeah.
This is, you know, a monument to our past. And a very democratised monument, really, because everybody is here.
Yeah.
There's the elevated people, you know. It's interesting to see the social status of some people we remember, but also the status of people we don't. And, you know, the levelling quality of a graveyard, no matter what size the monument is. So, look, I would certainly be very interested in you know, unleashing some of our research students here. There are many stories to be told. And this is a place where those stories can begin, for sure.
Well, great to have this opportunity today to talk about a topic that's dear to my heart, but It was so good to have your support and the support of the Celtic Club. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Val. I'm really looking forward to it. Thanks very much. We'll get on with it.
Come on, gather round. In 1916, when Billy Hughes was at war, leading Australia to war in Flanders and other places and tried to introduce conscription, the metropolitan papers wouldn't carry any anti-conscription material, but the Ballarat Evening Echo was edited by a man called James Scullen, of two Derry-born parents, John, a railway plate layer, and Anne Logan. And John Scullen, as you, John was his father. James went on to become Prime Minister of Australia in the very unlucky year of 1929. One more, come please have a look here. In 1961, Arthur Cornwall failed to be Prime Minister of Australia by one seat. He would have been the only Gaelic-speaking Prime Minister of the country. Arthur was born in Victoria. He is remembered on two big things as being an advocate of the White Australia policy, but indeed I think that's sometimes exaggerated. But he's also remembered as the Minister for Immigration, who broke the pattern of bringing only people from the English-British Isles and started bringing in Italians, Croatian, German, Austrian, Polish and so on, the displaced people. The UNHCR, big migration here after the war. I'll just give you a word about Elizabeth. She's Bessie Marin, born in Enniskillen in Fermanagh, and she was one of the main teachers in the Gaelic League, the Irish language classes in Melbourne during the 20s and 30s. And Arthur and Bessie ran a paper called the Irish Review, which contains a bit of Irish Australian history. Much to say about all these people, but we've got places to go and jobs to do before we sleep. Hey, keep your eyes open. Use all, like myself, who've got Irish surnames. You're bound to see somebody with your surname on one of these graves. Patrick Maloney. This is erected not by, that's a very expensive thing to be erected probably in the 1890s after they've all died, and somebody who put it up was one of the first three graduates in medicine from this university here, and he put the money into putting this up, but he then hired Morgan Jagers to do this stonework. This is locally produced. So this is part of the revival of the 1890s, as in Ireland, as in all around the world. Some groups were of the emigrant population were in touch with the cultural developments that were happening in Ireland, and it affects them here, and they do some rather marvellous work. I'm sorry that that's darkened in the recent years. The weather's caused it today. But anyway, that's an example of, then the Jagers work all around this state. If you go to a country cemetery and anywhere around here, you'll often just see at the bottom Jagers and Son. That's a German refugee name from the 1700s, who then grew up in Tullamore. He came here as a 4-year-old. Father had a business in Queensland, came down here in the 80s. They're not the first to make Celtic crosses here, but they had a big run on, and I'll take you to Jagers' grave later on. Sadly, his grave has got none of the decorative work that you'd expect. By the time he died, the family must have lost the plot. I don't know. Gloria and Excelsis Day, erected by John Thomas Hood to the memory of his beloved father, Martin Hood, one of the founders of the St Patrick's Society in this city. That's taking us back to the 1850s, 1840s. Formerly, Master Poor Law Commissioners, Loughrea, County Galway. Born Christmas Day 1822, died 909. In 1904, the Gaelic revival was in full swing and they used the Melbourne Town Hall for a big Irish concert, including songs and poetry in Irish. And Nicholas O'Donnell recited the famous Raftery poem for Mary Hines. And Archbishop Thomas Carr, no fanatical nationalist he, from the floor said, "You got the pronunciation a bit wrong, Nicholas." I point out a couple of things. The following week in the newspaper, Martin Hood wrote to the newspaper and said, "My father took me to Ballylee when I was a boy and I heard Blind Raftery recite that poem." So it's extraordinary to think that in 1904 you could have a person living in Melbourne who had heard and remembered and passed on the knowledge of having heard the Blind Raftery. Misha Raftery an fila lawn Dorcas is grod, and the Sula gon solas, lacunas gon craw, exulsier and mo asta, the solas mo cree.
Oh, that's right. I remember that.
Yeah, yeah. Raftery famously said, "Do vi me ima massive ihassive igatlo mayina beg me a rish." He said, "When I get back to Mayo in summer, I will again feel young." Why do you feel young? Because you're amongst the people you knew when you were young. We get into the heavy duty, lots of Irish names here. Did you notice the names as you walk past the nuns' graves? To the migrant population of the 1800s, education was everything. Until about 1870, that education was done by lay people, lay teachers. Then when funds were withdrawn from denomination schools, the bishops and the laity went to a lot of trouble to bring out nuns from Ireland. Most of those nuns have been in unmarked graves until the last 2 decades. The people who lifted up the migrant population by giving them access to literacy and so on, many of them are buried there. This is the 4 graves of Jager's family, down into the 1970s actually. They've kept the family grave. Morgan is the key activist in the, not only at Monumental Mason, but in the Gaelic League, and particularly the Irish pipers. Pipers were terribly important in those days to give a public presence. If you're having a march or a gathering, the pipes were a big symbol and a big rallying thing. Probably equally important as the dance. They have a son whose name is Michael Davitt Jagers, baptised in 1895 when Michael Davitt, the great patriot and international Labor figure, toured Australia to great acclaim for a number of months. And Michael Davitt is the godfather of Michael Davitt Jagers. Where did Michael Davitt Jagers die? On the green fields of Flanders. And he is memorialised over there in Royal Parade on the monument from Trinity College people, that's local Trinity College people, Michael Davitt Jagers. For the glory of God and for the honour of Ireland, this person, the key person in this thing in terms of fame, is Nicholas O'Donnell. Born in Bullingarook on a poor farm, and I want to tell you my first contact with this family was at an Irish-Australian conference in, 30 years ago, and the after-dinner speaker was a man called Niall Brennan, one of those Brennans of the younger generation, and he told the story of 4 migrants who had come to Australia dramatically, And only at the end did he tell us that they were 4 of his great-grandparents. But the one he told was that Michael O'Donnell, Nicholas's father, in 1865, having got a bit of land at Bullingarook, he and his mates, the Hogans and the Fogartys and the Fitzgeralds, went down to a land sale down in Bacchus Marsh, and they didn't buy land, but some of their mates bought the newly being divided land, and they were riding home at 3 o'clock, and he parted from the Hogan at the entrance to his lane, and he rode down the lane, and he speeded up his horse, and he hit his head on a overhanging gum tree and was dead by Friday. And Nicholas was at that stage about 3.5 years of age. So I heard this story from Niall and thought not much more about it until in the 1990s I started to learn. At the age of 55 I began to learn Irish and found out that probably the leading scholar of the Irish language and its very rich historical sources in the state was Nicholas O'Donnell, born in Bullingarook, a medical doctor, had a practice in Victoria Street, West Melbourne, the most concentrated area, suburb of working class Irish in this state was in West Melbourne. And here is the Noone family grave, John Noone.
Absolutely brilliant.
Me and my family have done a lot to look after this grave. This is my great-grandfather, John Noone, born in Peterswell, next door to Gort, in East Galway, in 1820. He arrived in Melbourne in 1857, at the age of 37, with photographic equipment. We have no idea how he would have got the capital to bring in photographic equipment and chemicals and set up in Collins Street West. He then became part of a movement working for the government in what's called photolithography. It's not the same as making chips. When they were transferring photographs to stone, all printing was done through putting it in stone, the glass plates would always smash when they tried to transfer the image chemically from the plate. And the big breakthrough was getting paper, wet paper, that was the big breakthrough in photolithography. Well, a bloke called Osborne invented the process down here at the Lands Department with John Noone and another guy as his assistants. And Osborne then went off to America to sell the patent, and Noone stepped up to be the photolithographer for the Lands Department. His wife, Julia Riley, 20 years his junior, is the daughter of Thomas Riley and Jane from Parramatta, both convicts transported in 1840. She, who became the wife of the photolithographer, had at the age of 9 been taken by her parents, freed convicts, to the California gold rush. They were global people before the word globalisation was invented. She then met John Noone, who she brought to the marriage a child, he brought to the marriage a child. They then had 13 children. And I'm descended from one of those things, and so on and so forth. But when he came here, he lived in Collingwood, and he was mayor of Collingwood, 1861 and 1863, John Noone. Thomas Corrigan, right, who was in the field riding waiter in the Grand National Steeplechase on Saturday the 11th of August 1894, and, after he fell from his horse, died the following Monday, aged 44. His wife was Robina. She died in 1947, many years later, and a son, Thomas, 1960. Faithful, fearless and brilliant horseman, universally admired by his many sterling qualities. Light may the green turf, which he loved so well, rest on a good man gone where all must go. Listen, there's heavenly music in the knell that rings the dawn of life, the end of woe. This is the grave. I think I've told you on the handout, haven't I, that Terence McSweeney, the hunger striker and the Mayor of Cork, his father migrated to Melbourne in 1885 and in summary seems to have lost the plot. He died here 9 years later without being reunited with the family. They were big. Does somebody remember? I mean, there's 8 or 10 children in that family. I presume he did what most people said, I'll go ahead and get a good job and bring you out. That was a standard thing, and it didn't work out. He died in a rooming house in Nicholson Street in Fitzroy. So then when Terence McSweeney died on hunger strike in 1920, you'll probably remember that Daniel Mannix was currently in England, refused admission to Ireland, and he led the funeral procession from Brixton prison to the cathedral and then on the boat to see it off to Ireland. So Mannix was kind of indissolubly linked with the Terence McSweeney group, and the Language Association here in Melbourne then renamed themselves the Terence McSweeney Creve Terence McSweeney. Well, now they then sort of realised that John had died here in Melbourne, and they decided they'd put up a monument to him and to Terence on this spot. And this was opened in 1923 by 2 delegates from the anti-treaty Republican side, Skellig, J.J. O'Kelly, and Father Flanagan, the socialist priest who was active in the anti-treaty side. They were both here in Melbourne trying to drum up support for the anti-treaty side, and opened this monument with a public event and large number of people. But about a few days later, the ceasefire was signed. Frank Aiken helped to engineer that, and both sides dropped arms in the Civil War, and they were very swiftly deported by the Australian government from Australia. So the 2 people who unveiled this, O'Kelly and Flanagan, got deported promptly. But on Easter Monday, since then, as far as I know, every year Republicans have gathered at this spot. I've been here when there were 3 commemorations on the one day during the internal fighting amongst the Republicans in the 70s. They didn't fight here, but they held separate commemorations. I'll give you a translation. One says, in memory of John McSweeney, born in Cork Island and died in Melbourne at the age of 59, may God have mercy on his soul. And on the other side, also in memory of his son, Terence McSweeney, Lord Mayor of the City of Cork and a leader of the Irish Republican Army, who died for the sake of the Republic in Brixton Prison, England, in October 20. May his soul rest at God's right hand. Well, that probably ranks with 1 or 2 other monuments in Australia for its kind of historical significance. I mean, it's military. On the front there are the battle axes. And in the day, in the 70s and 80s, if the local Sinn Féin people, they would come, some with berets and masks and so on.
In a dreary Brixton prison where an Irish rebel lay, by his side a priest was standing, ere his soul should pass away. And the faintly murmured, Father, as he clasped him by the hand, tell me this, before I die, shall my soul pass through Ireland? Shall my soul pass through old Ireland, pass through Cork City grand? Shall I see that old cathedral where St. Patrick took his stand? Shall I see that little chapel where I placed my heart and hand? Father, tell me, ere I die, shall my soul pass through Ireland? 'Twas for loving dear old Ireland, in this prison cell I died. 'Twas for loving dear old Ireland, in this foreign land I died. Will you meet my little daughter? Will you make her
understand?
But Father, tell me, ere I die, so my soul pass through Ireland. With his heart pure as a lily, and his body sanctified, in this dreary British prison, a brave Irish rebel died. Prayed the priest that wish be granted, as in blessing raised his hand. Father, grant this brave man's prayer.
May his soul pass through our land.
Oh, may
May his soul pass through our land.
There you are.
There you are.
You've done our bit. Now the volley of shots.
There you are. A tribute to Cork.
John O'Shannessy and his wife, Lady O'Shannessy. They're both from Turles. Margaret MacDonald. They got on a boat to come to Australia, and it pulled into Melbourne, and they met the young, energetic Patrick Gagan, the first Catholic priest in this town. And they got on so well, they said, "We're not going to Sydney. We're going to stay here." He had a go at farming down the peninsula or somewhere, it didn't work out. He came and had a go at doing a draper's strop in Elizabeth Street, which was then a creek. And the entry in the Australian Dictionary of Biography says, for about 10 years he was a successful draper, largely through his wife's shrewd business sense and perseverance. Nice to see that acknowledged. His political career began in 46. He stood for council, 1846. But in 1857, he became Premier of the state. This is in the wake of the enormous upsurge of democratic rights after Eureka. They get the vote. I think it's universal male suffrage. You know, the women don't get the vote till 901 or whatever it is. So it's male suffrage. But it was a very go-ahead thing. And for an Irish Catholic to be head of a government administrative unit in the Empire, I think this may be the first. So Victoria was like a place with Gavin Duffy, you know, when he had trouble with Irish politics because he was opposed by Archbishop Cullen and so on, and ran into a block. He was a liberal-minded, progressive Catholic politician. He thought, I'll go out to Australia. He also got to Melbourne and thought he was due to go to Sydney under the sponsorship of, what's his name, Parkes, Fran. But he met O'Shannessy. And O'Shannessy said, things are pretty good here. And they became allies. But then they fell out. In general, O'Shannessy became a squatter. And we're all on the side of the selectors against the squatters. Most of the Irish Australians of the 19th century were small farmers. The squatters had grabbed the land and so on and so forth. But O'Shannessy then started a farm, squatted up above the Murray into New South Wales, on the land that then became Cumaragunja, the very famous Aboriginal settlement. And he sent an official complaint to the government that by setting up this Aboriginal reserve near my squatting run, you are taking away my gins. Founder of the Melbourne Public Library, third son of Major General Barry from the County Cork, and he died on the 23rd of November 1880 at 67, a week after he sentenced Ned to death. And what's Ned's last words to him? "I will shortly see you in the place to which I am going." So he undoubtedly did help to found the university, and he undoubtedly did a public service by setting up the library. But I would like the person closest there with the white scarf to read the plaque that was put up a couple of years ago only. Please read it out loud.
This grave is also the final resting place of Louisa Bridget Barrow, born in Cork, Ireland in 1823, daughter of Patrick and Bridget Murphy, partner of Sir Edmund Barry 1846 to 1880, and mother of his 4 children. Passed away on 25th of March 1889. His plaque was erected by the Southern Metropolitan Cemeteries Trust on 19th of February 2016.
So in 2016, they erected a plaque to his partner, the mother, mistress, because, yes, that's right, the mother of the 4 children, who's also buried here. So that plaque is a bit of a win to get that plaque put up. Robert O'Hara Burke.
I'll give you a little postscript on Percy.
He's related to the Burkes of Galway. He's related to Lady Augusta Pearce and Lord Gregory. And he was an enthusiastic and able-bodied person, but he wasn't really equipped to lead an expedition up to the Gulf of Carpentaria and get back. Of the 3 people who made it to the swamps near the Gulf of Carpentaria, and they never actually reached the coast. The other one is John King, Galway man himself also. He survived, and when they got back to Melbourne, the establishment and the wealthy end of town had put up all the money for this thing. It's basically to beat South Australia. The purpose of the Burke and Wills rushed expedition was to what MacDonald Sturt, whatever his name was. He a year or so later just calmly went up and did it. Stewart, yes, MacDonald Stewart. Yeah. But King survived, and the establishment here then scapegoated him and tried to blame him for the deaths of Burke and Wills. John Noone, whose grave you had the honour of visiting today, was Mayor of Fitzroy at the time, and Mayor of Collingwood, and he arranged a public reception to support John King at that juncture when the worthies of the town were busy building a great big stone monument and other things. Listen, the Redmond Barry grave is the only one I've really shown you of a very important group in Irish Australian history in Victoria, namely the Anglo-Irish officials. The first 2 or 3 attorneys general are all from Ireland. A lot of the engineers, a lot of the lawyers and judges are all Irish, and they were known here as the cousinage because they're all connected through Trinity College and wealthy landowning in Ireland and stuff. And they play a big part in this town and were kind of outside our ken growing up. We never knew much about any of that sort of people, you know, because most of the Irish who came here in the 1800s came here to be farm labourers and domestic servants. Well, now I'm talking about probably maybe 150,000. I'm not talking about the cousinage would come down to a couple of dozen people. But it needs, in a proper tour, you'd have to include more of the cousinage than we've done today.
I'd like to say thank you to everyone for coming along today out in the cold, freezing weather, and we luckily have made it before the rain. I'd like to also to thank Ronan and Val Noone for organising this event. This is our inaugural walking tour, will we call it that? And pass over to Ronan.
And of course, thank Catherine very much for organising it, as she organises everything so well. Thanks everyone for coming. Val, that was splendid, and we're so grateful to you for giving your time and your incredible knowledge. I don't think anybody in the world knows as much about Irish Melbourne as you, and we're very, very honoured to have you and privileged to have you, and it's great that we've got some record of it as well.
What a day out to have people who wanted to listen. But I have one acknowledgement I have to make. The person who did a lot of the groundwork was Mary Doyle, and she's always said that the main contribution she made to me was to teach me that you could file things in alphabetical order.